My interest in negotiation actually started all the way back in the 90s. I was the head of a public tech company up in Stockholm, and I thought I was a great negotiator. Because when you are heading a big organization, you're doing a lot of negotiation, and hey, I was doing it all the time, so I thought, hey, I'm really good. What happened back then was that my former partner, Swede by the name of Ivar Und, we hired him as a consultant on negotiation. And I'm not exaggerating my story. In less than 2 hours, he moved me from what I called unconsciously incompetent to be consciously incompetent. And it's great feeling unconsciously incompetent because you don't know that you don't know. But the moment that you're consciously incompetent is kind of a wake-up call because suddenly you realize all the stuff that you thought you knew actually don't know. So back to May 1998 to be exact, I suddenly realized in 120 minutes that I was actually a lousy negotiator. And I also realized that there was a tremendous potential being lost by not having that toolbox and tools and understanding of what makes a great negotiator. So I went home the same day and told my wife that, hey, I'm going to change career. I'm going to quit my job as a CEO of the tech industry, and I'm going to join forces with my former partner. He's unfortunately not among us anymore, but I wanted to help the world improve the way we negotiate. And that's really what I'm doing today. So when people are asking me, do you have a job? I'm actually replying by saying, no, really, I don't. I'm on a mission, and I'm sincere about that. I want to change and improve the way we negotiate. And it's like the horse and the buggy. It's not just a question about making the horse and the buggy run faster. It's about changing the mindset. So it's really about inventing the car. And what I see a lot of organizations in my field are doing is basically preaching the same mythology all the time, just trying to be better at riding that horse or driving that buggy. And in my world, it's about changing the mindset, changing the way we think about negotiations. So back in the late 90s, we developed a whole new method on negotiation. I'm a strong believer in collaborative negotiation, not because it just sounds nice, but because it makes financial sense. We can actually prove through research that up to 42% additional value can be created when we move into what we call SMARTnership. And SMARTnership is a concept we created. So when you choose a negotiation strategy, just to make it very simple, you can either go with a zero sum, you can go with a partnership approach, or you can go with a SMARTnership approach. And the SMARTnership approach is really partnership version 2.0. So we developed SMARTnership and all the ingredients that is now part of the SMARTnership approach. And it has really made a change, not only to us, obviously, but more importantly to our clients and our students, where we basically start off by saying we have to rethink how we negotiate. Yes, 27 books since 1998. I wrote and published my first book in the late 1998, and the fun part is, I don't know whether it's funny or embarrassing, but I reread this book a few years ago, and I have to admit, today when reading it, I concluded that was the worst book with the worst content on negotiation I read in a long time, and that's pretty embarrassing, obviously, when it's your own book. The reason I mentioned that is because that also made me realize that negotiation in 1998 is not the same as negotiation today. Negotiation is actually a moving target. We are thinking differently. We have different tools available. We have different methods. We have different approaches. So what is being talked about negotiation in the 80s or 90s or even 2000 is not necessarily compatible with the thinking of today. Let's just take the latest topic, obviously, AI. My book on AI and negotiation is focusing obviously on the latest development. And obviously in 1998, you would not write a book about AI and negotiation because AI was not a thing among the average individual. And now it is a very important tool. Now, back to your question, what have changed? Well, I would say that the reason people often ask me, why do you keep writing books and what is your motivation? And the motivation is really developing myself first and foremost. I obviously want to share our research, our knowledge, and what we're doing. But it's really a journey for myself as well, because it forces me to sit down and study. It forces me to sit down and think. It forces me to use resources on developing new thinking on how to negotiate. Because to write one book, I have to study a lot. And I probably spend 10 times the amount of time thinking about the content of the book, researching for the content of the book, compared to just writing the book. And then obviously it also forces me to go through the editorial process. And I've decided early on not to self-publish, because when you go through an established publisher, they also have kind of a filter where obviously they decline a lot of proposals for a book and they accept some proposals. And I'm lucky because based on my experience and the number of books, I have a pretty easy access to get a book published today. And when I'm writing a script, it's usually in a miserable state when I hand it in, because it's just my thoughts and ideas. And then I get in the hands of a really qualified editor. And they challenge me all the time. That's a negotiation as well, because we are discussing and negotiating back and forth about the setup of the book. So my chapter 12 is now suddenly chapter 3, and my chapter 2 is suddenly chapter 10, and chapter 9 is going out, and they ask me to rewrite chapter 8, and a whole value development of the book is happening right there. And I'm often thinking that whole process with that editorial levels that I go through doesn't exist if you self-publish. So it's so easy for everybody today to publish a book, but that doesn't mean that it's actually a quality book, because it's just somebody that is writing down their ideas. And one other important thing I want to say is that you have to be careful with not only books in negotiation, but books on knowledge in general, because this is just the author's ideas and personal experience. Because what if might work for that author doesn't mean it will work for you. The concept, the ideas, the philosophy I'm writing about is something that has been researched. It's something that has been tested in laboratories, something that has been tested in reality, something that has been done in major corporations and government. And I feel it's important not just sharing or not sharing at all my subjective ideas and values, but actually hand over some studied and proven philosophies. The moment I felt it was necessary to rethink the way we negotiate was really when I experienced that getting to yes had failed its purpose. And what do I mean by that? Here I'm sitting criticizing one of the best-selling books ever and one of the first books out trying to create a framework on negotiation. The book itself is a great book. It's a very important book. I completely acknowledge the importance of getting to yes, but we have to acknowledge it has failed, the purpose. And the purpose of getting to yes was actually trying to educate people in negotiation, make them leave positional negotiation and be more collaborate more in negotiation in general. But I have met hundreds, if not thousands of people who obviously bought Getting to Yes, read Getting to Yes, perhaps even reread it several times, believe in the content, but they're still negotiating in a very positional, zero-sum manner. And that's why I am provoking by claiming the book failed its purpose, because it didn't really change people's mindset on how to negotiate. It gave them tools and frameworks and different approaches, but it didn't really make them change their minds. So one of the things that I started doing in the late 80s was actually focusing on how do we make people seriously change their mindset. And you cannot just do that by talking about what you should do. You obviously, in a commercial negotiation, have to put some value on it. And that's why I start focusing on value in negotiation. Because why do two commercial organizations negotiate? They do it really just for one purpose. And that one purpose is to create and distribute value. I just repeat that, to create and distribute value. That's really the only reason why two organizations are negotiating with each other. And we have, through our research, documented that up to 42% of values in a traditional negotiation are being lost between the two parties. They didn't identify it, capitalize it, or utilize it. So imagine that you are sitting negotiating with a counterpart. You've been sitting there for hours or days. You reach an agreement, shake hands, sign the contract, and leave the conference room. And both of you are very happy about the outcome. But neither of you identified, capitalized, or utilized an additional up to 42% that is still lying on the conference table when you left. This concept, by the way, is what we call NegoEconomics, which is just short for negotiation economics. And that's an award-winning mathematical model that I created that basically finds and capitalizes the asymmetric value between two parties. So the difference between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. I also talk a lot about trust because I firmly believe and can prove that trust is generating value as well. I actually did my doctorate on trust, AI, and negotiation. And what we found is that, may not be surprising, that if we have a high level of trust in a negotiation, it will take a shorter time to reach an agreement and we capture more value compared to a negotiation where trust is very low. There it takes a longer time to reach an agreement and we don't capture all that value that is out there. So the same thing goes with trust. In the beginning of my career in the world of negotiation, I was just preaching that trust is important. And I could see that everybody in the room was sitting there nodding and saying, sure, trust is a nice thing to have. But it didn't really make an impact on people because it's just a nice thing to have. So that's why I went into research trust and came up with the word trust currency, which obviously is just the two words trust and currency put together, because trust is a monetary value. We can actually capitalize trust with more than 30% value in a negotiation, back to what I said before, where trust is high compared to low trust negotiations. Great question. SMARTnership is different from traditional collaborative or positional negotiation methods by focusing on a few additional things. One of them is having a negotiation strategy. I firmly believe that a successful negotiator and a successful corporation have a negotiation strategy. They have decided how they want to negotiate. The scary part is that when I work with a new client and their C-suite, I often ask them, so could you please share with me your official negotiation strategy? And quite often they just sit there and look out nowhere, quiet for a moment, and then they say, because they don't have one. And then I ask them, but do you have a research and development strategy? And they acknowledge they do. Do you have a sales strategy? They acknowledge they do. Do you have a communication strategy? They got that too. Have you got a budget for the next 12 months? They do. So they have all the other stuff that business schools around the world advise us that we should have running a business, except our negotiation strategy. So that's one thing that separates SMARTnership from other methods out there in the world. Second thing is trust. We focused in the SMARTnership negotiation community on creating trust, or trust a currency as we call it, because trust creates value. So if we have a higher level of trust in negotiation, our transactional cost goes down and our profit increases. So trust is not just something fluffy, it's actually a monetary value. So we focus on trust and focus on how to develop, recognized, and be sure to be seen as trustworthy in negotiation. The third thing we do is we focus on negotiating on how to negotiate. And I know this sounds really weird, but we really have to agree with the counterpart on how we want to conduct our negotiation before we start negotiating. This is actually the one thing most of our clients and students are struggling with because it sounds a little bit weird. I completely admit that. But we save so much time by investing a little bit of time in the beginning of the negotiation by discussing on how we should negotiate. Remember this, United Nations in New York has never ever declared an international standard on how we should negotiate. So you may perceive negotiation like playing chess. I may perceive negotiation like playing tennis. So if you and I are going to negotiate with each other and we don't negotiate on how to negotiate, we might be wasting hours playing our own game. You're sitting there playing chess, I'm sitting here playing tennis. So imagine I walk into the conference room with a racket ready to play and you're sitting with and moving the pieces around on the chessboard. And we each think this is the game we're going to play. So we have a whole formula on how we have to negotiate before we start negotiating. And the fourth and the final thing that separates the SMARTnership negotiation method from other methods out there is the concept of negotiation economics, short NegoEconomics. And we have found that up to 42% of the values in a negotiation often are being lost between the parties. The asymmetric value, not because they don't want to, obviously, not because they're not focusing on it, but simply because they don't know how to capture that value. And I see negotiators coming to us, participating in a workshop, or negotiators we're advising. When we ask them before we get started, how would you rate yourself as a negotiator on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being great, 1 being the opposite? And most people that have been negotiating for years consider themselves fairly good, so they give themselves a 7 and 8. Then we take them through just one day in a workshop or work with them for 2-3 hours, giving them all these tools that I just mentioned, and then we ask them to reevaluate their score that they gave themselves 6 hours ago. And now, as you just remember, they would typically give themselves a 7 and 8, but now they actually realize what they didn't know, so they reduce their original score to 3 and 4. And that happens in 99.9% of all cases, and it will probably happen to the audience watching right now as well. Most people think they know what it is they know and are not aware of what they don't know. And these 4 concepts that I just mentioned here is basically new for most professional negotiators that we're working with. And that is regardless of the industry, the number of years they've been doing what they're doing, and the formal education. NegoEconomics is exactly as you said. It's a term I coined. It stands for negotiation economics, and it's basically very simple, award-winning mathematical model that finds the unutilized value in a negotiation. The difference between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. If I should share a very quick example, a major client we have in the energy industry, we're negotiating with a sub-supplier. And they had a situation where the sub-supplier was a little bit too expensive, but instead of just going into a positional negotiation, a lose-win situation where the buyer, our client, would just demand a price reduction of whatever they needed, they decided to work in SMARTnership and try and capitalize NegoEconomics. And one of the areas they found was terms of payment, because our client actually demanded a very long line of credit. And the way they did it was they sat down and agreed with the supplier, let's be open and transparent about our cost of capital. And they figured out that the cost of capital was way higher for the supplier than our Fortune 500 organization that had a pretty low cost of capital. So they switched that. So instead of asking for a very long line of credit, my client suggested that they could pay a substantial amount of the total contract value up front. And by doing that, they capitalized $400,000 in mutual value. Now, that additional value that was capitalized, my client said, you know what, we're going to take that because that's the price, or that's the value we need for making you competitive. But they obviously compensated the counterpart for that cost they had. So the supplier didn't lose any value or money whatsoever, and my client saved $400,000. So think about NegoEconomics as just the asymmetric value, the difference between your cost, my value, and my cost and your value. And we can find NegoEconomics in terms of payment, delivery, warranty, installation, education, transportation. The list goes on and on and on. It's basically just require that you are transparent and you know your cost and value on the variables you are negotiating. You're right. I often hear people talk about they like the win-win idea in negotiation. I actually don't like the term win-win, and the reason for that is that sometimes I hear organizations saying that we definitely go for win-win in negotiation, but what they often do is that they actually go for win-win for themselves. So the more they win and not really interested in how much the counterpart lose, the more they call it win-win. So it really becomes a win-win-win just for one side and not for both parties. Now, obviously, the original idea about the concept of win-win is that neither party leaves a negotiation being a loser, but that's often not the case. Unfortunately, I meet a negotiator who firmly believe that a successful negotiation requires that you leave the negotiation being slightly dissatisfied with the outcome, and I would leave the negotiation being slightly dissatisfied with the outcome as well. I find that to be a horrible idea. I mean, that is just terrible, isn't it? That everybody is slightly miserable about the outcome of the negotiation. I believe that negotiation is a mutual exercise where I'm here to help you reduce your cost, your liability, and improve your profit. And you are here for the exact same reason, to help me reduce my cost, my risk, my liabilities, and help me improve my profit. I often recommend my clients and students in real-life negotiation to open up negotiation by saying exactly that. I'm here to help you reduce your cost, liabilities, and risk, and I'm here to help you improve your profit. Would you be interested in having me helping you do that? I can promise you, if you open a negotiation saying that, your counterpart will acknowledge that. They may look a little bit suspicious, but they will accept. Why wouldn't they? And after they have accepted your approach to negotiation like that, you have to reverse the question and say, and by the way, I think that your purpose here today is doing the same for me, helping me reduce my cost, my risk, my liabilities, and helping improve my profit, because that's why we're here. We're here to try and make 2 + 2 equal more than 4. And I'm not here to make an additional $100 at your expense, and I don't see you being sitting here making additional $100 at my expense. We're here to find $100 in additional value. And by finding the $100 in additional value, we can split that somehow. So my approach to negotiation is collaborative, obviously, because I believe in it. Not that every single negotiation can be collaborative, but a lot of them can. And a collaborative negotiation for me is about creating value. Again, why do we negotiate? To create and distribute value. So when we are in a collaborative negotiation, my approach to negotiation is about creating that value and then negotiate how to distribute that value. I think that's a wonderful question. Why do so many people still underestimate the value of trust? Well, I think there are various reasons for it. One of the things are that everybody understand that trust is nice and good and definitely believe in trust. I very rarely meet people who don't believe in trust. But I think a lot of people actually don't connect it to a value. One of the exercises I often do working with a new group of executives is that I ask them if they are able to capitalize trust. And a lot of people say, nope, you can't capitalize trust. And then I find 2 identical products. It could be a bottle of water. So I picked up 2 identical bottles of water, go to one of the individuals in class. I hold up the 2 bottles that are identical, and then I share the following story. Imagine you're a procurement officer in a major corporation. You're responsible of buying bottled water, right? And you have bottle A here that comes from a supplier that you've been working with for, let's say, 6 years. You like this individual. You trust this individual. You have a great relationship. And this supplier has always fulfilled every promise that they made to you, right? And the price is whatever. Here comes a new supplier on the market, as you can see, offering the exact same product, the same bottle of water. But here's a challenge. The new supplier, you get this stomach sensation that you don't really like that individual. You don't really trust that individual. You can't put your finger on what it is, but there's just something about that individual that you don't like. But here's the challenge. The price of this exact same identical bottle of water is 1% cheaper than from the supplier you like and trust and been working with for 6 years. Who would you buy your bottle of water from? Now, I can promise you 99% of everybody asked this question will point to the existing one they've been working with for 6 years and say, 1% price difference, I would go with the one I trust and like. Then I increase the price difference saying, okay, let's assume it's 3%. Still, everybody goes with the one they like and trust. Price difference, 6%. Still, majority goes with the one they trust and like. When I hit 10%, the first negotiators start to drop off and say, now I'll go with the other one. Despite the fact that I don't like that individual, don't trust that individual, the price difference is now so big, so I have to test it out. But we still have a lot of people that hangs on. And they are hanging on until I get to about 15 or 16%. Then they say, now I got to switch. So imagine we are talking about a simple product like a bottle of water, and we are willing to accept the price difference of up to 15, 16% just based on emotion, likability, trust, and the relationship. And what we know from studies is that when we move into something way more advanced than a bottle of water, a complicated product, that difference in price that we accept are just going to grow. So if you have a supplier you trust and like compared to one you don't trust and you don't like that has a very similar product, you're willing to sometimes pay up to 36% more just based on that trust level. So trust is definitely something we can capitalize. And back to your question, think that this is something a lot of people don't think about. That trust is not just a nice thing, it's something we can capitalize. That's the reason that we call it trust currency. Emotions in general in negotiations are very important, and it's all about understanding the counterpart. I often tell negotiators that one of the tools a great negotiator really masters is simply asking questions, showing an interest in the counterpart, perhaps even show more interest in the counterpart than in your own position. I often provoke people in the West by saying they are very egocentric. And what I mean by that is that we, because obviously I'm part of that group of people as well, have a tendency to step into a negotiation thinking about what is my cost, what is my risk, what is my liability, what is my target, what is my purpose, what is it I want to achieve. And then we just navigate that negotiation purely based on our egocentric ambitions. And we forget that there's another individual sitting on the other side of the table that has the same body temperature as yours, but they might have different interests, values, cost, opportunities, and targets. So we should switch that completely and start focusing on the counterpart. And that requires emotional intelligence and empathy. Now, one thing I'll also say that, when you meet somebody who might be combative, aggressive, or zero-sum orientated, don't go into argumentation. Don't go into debates. Don't go into just sitting there and fighting and struggling, because pressure creates counter pressure. What you should do is actually show empathy. And how do you do that? Well, let me give you an example. If you're traveling in Asia, and I'm mentioning Asia because their understanding of hospitality is way, way, way better than it is generally in the West. But let's say you check into a hotel like the Oriental in Bangkok, considered one of the best hotels in the world. And you check in and you go to a room, but you are unhappy with your room for whatever reason. So you go back to reception to complain. How do you think that the staff at the reception at Oriental in Bangkok is going to handle your complaint? Do you think they're going to argue and say stuff like, hang on, do you know where you are? You're at the Oriental in Bangkok, one of the best hotels in the world. If you're unhappy with your room, you can just check out, leave, and go to another hotel. I don't care. Do you think they're going to do that? Probably not. Do you think they're going to agree with you and say, do you know what, sir, you're absolutely right. You got the worst room in the entire hotel. I don't think they're going to do that either. What they're going to do, and listen carefully, they're going to say the following. I understand you feel you got a problem. Let me see if I can help you deal with that problem you feel you got. That's empathy. That's emotional intelligence. I'm showing I understand the world from that individual's point of view. I'm not agreeing, I'm not disagreeing, I'm just showing empathy. So emotional intelligence is really important to understand people, because remember one thing, all business is human, right? And what I mean by that is that all business is human. It is people doing business with people. I always laugh when I read in the Financial Times or Washington Post or what have you that company A has made a deal with company B. I'm always laughing thinking, what a load of BS. Apologize my language, but it is, because two companies has never made a deal. It was John that did a deal with Maria. That was exactly what happened and nothing else. And if John was replaced by Peter, the whole thing might have failed. So think about it this way. Emotions is part of human beings, and emotional intelligence is really important to deal correctly in any negotiation. That is a great question. How are we handling trusts, or how are we handling a deal where trust is low in the beginning? I often claim that I, within the first 15 minutes of any negotiation, can identify whether it's going to be successful or not. And most of the time, I'm actually right about that, because I'm watching the relationship, I'm watching the transparency, I'm watching how trust is developing. And if trust is not developing, but actually going in minus, this is going to be a very, very tough negotiation. One of the things that I recommend is actually verbalizing trust, putting trust on the agenda. And I know this is provoking to some people, but I very often in real life advise my clients to talk about trust in the beginning as part of rules of the game. How do we negotiate? And the reason for that is, why not? Why shouldn't we discuss trust? Because it's such an essential part of a successful negotiation. So put it on the agenda, putting on the visual aids, talk about how can we together develop and increase trust, and what happens if trust is declining. So I try to avoid ending up in a situation where trust is low, simply because we haven't addressed the topic of trust. Well, today we have a lot of researchers that are focusing on AI and AI in negotiation, but we actually started all the way back in 2019. I did the first study together with the organization World Commerce and Contracting, their founder Tim Cummins, and we did studies on AI before AI actually came out. So way before ChatGPT, way before you and I had access to AI. Tim and I conducted a study where we actually had people negotiating with technology. So we basically just created technology that wasn't there. And the purpose was to see if there was a different outcome of negotiation, not negotiating with a human being. When ChatGPT came out, we were very quick to grab that opportunity and repeated the study. And that study has actually been published in a peer-reviewed research paper. Because what we did very quickly was that we gathered teams from around the world and we put them into a simulation. And it was groups of 2 individuals negotiating with other 2 individuals. And then we just compared the outcome. And what we did was we had negotiations where neither of the 2 parties utilized AI. We had negotiations where one side was using AI and the counterpart was not. And then we had negotiations where both parties were using AI. Now, I encourage you to download the paper. It's called Friend or Foe, and you can download it for free, and you can read all the content and details and outcome of that research. But what we found very quickly was that in negotiation where both parties were embracing AI, we saw dramatic change in the outcome of that negotiation. What we found was that the time to reach an agreement was considerably lower, and they reached an agreement much, much faster than when 2 parties were negotiating without the use of AI. That was one conclusion. The other conclusion that was very important as well was they captured a lot more value. They basically captured all of the value that was available in the negotiation. And the third conclusion that was a surprise to me as well was that trust, transparency, and honesty increased in the negotiation where both parties were using AI. So I would say all the way back from 2019, I quickly identified that AI to negotiation was basically what electricity was to humankind. It is going to fast forward the quality, if we choose to, how we negotiate. It is going to improve the speed of how we negotiate, and it's going to improve the utilization of value in negotiation if we choose to. And the reason I'm saying that is obviously, like any tool, it could be abused. And to me, AI is just a tool, just like a calculator or a spreadsheet or a computer or what have you. It's just a tool. And why would you use a tool that can make life more simple for you? Because obviously it can deal with data way, way faster than any human being are able to. Now, I have a couple of warnings talking about AI, and one of them is that AI is not a shortcut. I mean, if you are an unexperienced, uneducated negotiator, AI will not save you. It will be the same as you go to a racetrack, jump into an F1 Formula car, and you don't have a driver's license. You're going to crash and burn, right? You can't drive the car just because the technology is there. Same goes with AI. If you don't know how to negotiate, you should not start using AI. You should probably take baby steps and learn to negotiate, and when you feel capable as a negotiator, then you start to use more advanced tools like AI. So AI is obviously here to stay, and I would encourage everybody to use AI in their negotiations. I often use the term when I'm talking to anybody who want to listen to me, that it's not a question whether AI will replace human beings. It's a fact that individuals using AI in negotiation will replace negotiators not using AI. I would say one of the biggest misunderstandings of using AI in negotiation is that it's a shortcut, and it can actually liberate you from studying negotiation and being a great negotiator before using AI. AI is a tool. It's the same if you don't know how to work in Excel or spreadsheet. Well, it's very hard to use it as a benefit, and the same thing goes with AI. You need to be able to understand the prompting correctly. You need to understand the psychology in negotiation. You need to understand how to prepare correctly. You need to understand how to ask the right question. There's a lot of things you need to understand before using AI. So you might be an AI genius, you might be a negotiation genius, but you also need to find that mutual area in between technology and negotiation, because it's still human beings negotiating. It's still all business is human, so it's still people negotiating with people, but now added with the tool called AI. So it's really important understanding, and there's that misunderstanding that AI can just replace human beings. I don't believe that in the first place. And secondly, there's also the misunderstanding that it can basically just replace the knowledge about negotiation. That is not the case either. Yes, I feel very lucky and privileged. LinkedIn Learning reached out to me some month ago and asked me if I wanted to develop AI and negotiation training program for LinkedIn Learning platform. And I accepted that and developed the program on negotiation. Now, that also took us further because we developed a whole program on AI and negotiation. It's a full day program where you embrace both the philosophy of modern negotiation, but also how to integrate AI into negotiation in general. I believe we're one of the first who are doing that. And in connection with this, my latest book, The SMART Negotiator, is being released as well on Wiley. And it's basically a book that is summarizing all the knowledge we have gained about AI in negotiation since 2019. So it's kind of a guidebook. It's kind of a manual on how you can use AI in negotiation, where you should use AI in negotiation, and also really when you shouldn't use AI in negotiation. So there's various platforms where you can study AI in negotiation right now. There's our own full day, one-day program. There's the LinkedIn Learning online self-paced program. And there are obviously the SMART Negotiator, the new book where you can study and learn about AI in negotiations as well. Yes, that's right. I feel very privileged. Global Guru has acknowledged me as number 3 in the world on Global Gurus on negotiation. I'm in company with very, very acknowledged experts from Harvard, various universities around the world, and other acknowledged experts. So I'm very grateful to be named among that group of people. The SMARTnership negotiation strategy has been named number 3, the 3rd best negotiation program in the world as well, which I feel is amazing as well. I'm very humbled about that honor. And SMARTnership Negotiation is actually the most awarded negotiation program in the world today. We have won the World Commerce and Contracting Strategy Award. We have received the IACCM Innovation Award. We have received the Danish Design Award. We have received the Organization of Public Procurement Negotiation Strategy of the Year Award. There's a number of different awards we have received for SMARTnership Negotiation. And what does it mean to me? Well, I am very humble and honored that we get the recognition. I'm also glad we do because obviously it sounds weird coming from me, but SMARTnership Negotiation is a really, really good product. It is very different from a lot of other negotiation programs out there. And by getting that recognition, it obviously creates awareness. It makes professionals aware that this product is out there because there's so much noise in the world today. I mean, everybody is trying to sell their service and their product, and there's so many negotiation programs out there. And trust me, there's a lot of good negotiation programs out there. It's not only SMARTnership negotiation training that is good. As I said before, we're only number 3. So obviously there are 2 programs that are recognized being better than SMARTnership negotiation. But it's very important that the buyer of negotiation workshops and advisory services think about who they pick. And if they don't pick SMARTnership negotiation, we are very happy to direct them towards somebody we respect and acknowledge. And the SMARTnership negotiation is not for everybody. And there are definitely other very good programs and directions out there. So I would say it helps us. The recognition that we get helps us making the world aware of SMARTnership negotiation, what we're offering. And obviously it's a reward for all the hard work. I mean, I worked hard to get where we are in development of this program, still do, and it's just kind of a reward. Look at it this way: if you have been practicing for years to go to Olympics and run 100 meters, I think you are happy when you win the gold medal or silver or bronze as well, because it's kind of a reward of all the hard work you put in, and I think that's probably the same for me. Yes, we are working with some of the major corporations in the world, both companies and governments. And one project that stands out, I would say, seeing the client capitalizing value very quickly after a workshop is the biggest reward we can get. I firmly believe that the reason that we do commercial negotiations is to create and distribute value. So when we see a client that capitalizes values immediately after workshop, it's very rewarding. Just to give you an example, we had a client in the energy sector that had a group of executives on a 2-day workshop, and less than 2 weeks after they finalized the workshop, in one negotiation, they capitalized an additional $400,000 based on the philosophy of SMARTnership and NegoEconomics. I sometimes look at LinkedIn or other platforms where some of our competitors are announcing that, they had people participating in the workshop, and that individual saying it was the greatest workshop ever. I was very happy to participate. I learned a lot. And I'm sure they did. And I acknowledge the importance of all of that. But to me, it means a lot more when the client leaves and said, I made $400,000 2 weeks after I attended your program. And we have numerous examples of clients leaving our workshop and immediately capitalizing values like that. I mean, if any of our viewers today would like a list of those, just ask me and we'll be happily to share the stories. We have actually white papers on a lot of these cases where it is factual, it is capitalized, and we can monetize that value that has been created. So the payback value of joining a SMARTnership negotiation is huge. I mean, you can capitalize the investment and the outcome immediately. And I'm not saying that as a sales rep, because I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's actually calculated value that can be proven. So I think that's pretty important, and one of the most rewarding things that I can learn from a client, that they actually call us to tell us that we generated this amount of value. And the more important part is it's often not a zero-sum game. So they didn't create $400,000 at the expense of the counterpart. It's actually additional value, NegoEconomics, that they mutually created with the counterpart. So that's really the reward I'm getting. Yes, I am an associate professor at 4 different universities, 3 in Europe and 1 in the US. And I've been doing that for close to 20 years. I'm doing it for various reasons. One of them is I truly like to work with executive MBA students. It is typically executive in their 40s, 50s, that are running companies, that are in charge of major negotiations, and it's fun working with individuals in an academic settings. So that's rewarding for me and hopefully for them as well. The other reason is that obviously I can use the academic institution for research as well. So I have access to laboratory, access to methods, access to tools. So I can use that for my research, and I can use obviously the groups and the people we have for research as well. I would say I don't think I would be suitable to be 100% academic scholar. But it's basic something I truly enjoy, having one leg in the academic world, research, and having the other leg in the real world, so to speak, because it gives me kind of a balance. It gives me the opportunity to research and study, and it also gives me the opportunity to implement the research and the findings that we find in theory. We can put that into practice as well. That's a great question. What negotiation failure taught me the most? Well, there's actually a lot. I failed a lot. I've done so many bad negotiations in my life. Hopefully you learn from them. I would say one of the biggest mistakes is probably not asking a sufficient amount of questions. not getting to know the interest, the value, the cost of your counterpart. So a big mistake is definitely not asking questions. Another big mistake is being unilateral concession orientated, giving something away without getting something back. That's a big mistake. Lots of professional negotiators are doing all the time, especially if they have a variable. A variable is what's negotiable. If they have a variable that has no cost to them, then I often see that even experienced, mature professional negotiators are giving that one away and not knowing that that variable they're giving away creates a huge value to the counterpart. From a psychology point of view, that is absolutely wrong. You should never do that. There's a long story behind that, and I guess we don't have time for that today. So I would say asking questions, unilateral concession, and lack of listening skills. Listening, truly listening, not just listening to prepare what you want to say yourself, but truly listen to the counterpart is really essential. Really understanding what they're saying, where they're coming from, what is the interest, what is the cost, what is the benefit, what is the value. I think that's crucial. Another one, I know you just asked for one, but the list goes on and on and on, is lack of preparation, not understanding where you're coming from, not understanding your target, not understanding your threshold of pain, your walk away scenario. Messing up those three is a typical mistake as well that I often see. And then basically knowing how to prepare. And I would say you'll probably be surprised and shocked how many professional negotiators and organizations I encounter every year that basically don't have their prep work in order. They don't know what to prepare. They don't know how to prepare, or they are preparing all the wrong things. That will probably be my guess. It was top 5 things right now that you should focus on to improve your negotiation. My message to the next generation of negotiators, that's a huge responsibility. I would say identify a strategy. Make sure you know when you want to negotiate in zero sum. Be sure that you know when you want to negotiate in partnership, and be sure when you want to negotiate in SMARTnership. Having figured that out, and then knowing what that requires to negotiate in each of these 3 boxes is a huge benefit that will give you a benefit compared to a lot of other individuals that have no idea which of the 3 strategies they're negotiating in, or even why they are negotiating in that box they are negotiating in. So be very aware of that. Then I would also say, as an advice to the next generation of negotiators, be aware of negotiation economics. There is a huge unutilized value that is not being capitalized, utilized, that is just out there. And it's actually not complicated at all. It obviously requires that you know the tool, how to find it, but that can be learned very quickly. But when you got that tool, you're going to make so much more money than you would otherwise. So that will be my 2 takeaways for the future generation of negotiators. That's a big question. What do I want to leave with the concept of SMARTnership? I would say I'm a firm believer in transparency, in honesty, in collaboration. Not just because it's nice, but because it makes sense, because it creates value, because what is good for you is good for me, and what is good for me is good for you. Dr. Nash put it very nicely all the way back in the 60s. Dr. Nash was an American professor who actually won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he's the father of game theory, which obviously is very important for the world of negotiation. And he discovered back in the 60s, when he was still a student, that the famous The Wealth of Nations book, written by the Scottish philosopher Adam Smith, was absolutely wrong, because Adam Smith is basically saying in The Wealth of Nations that you should only do what is good for yourself. And from a mathematical point of view, Dr. Nash figured out that's actually wrong. It makes financial sense that you do what is good for yourself and the group at the same time. That's the only way you truly win. The purely egocentric approach to negotiation is not financially viable. It doesn't make sense. So the negotiator who steps into negotiation thinking The purpose here is just winning at the expense of the counterpart is actually losing and not knowing they are losing. So what I want to leave with SMARTnership is making the world aware that there's a better way to negotiate, there is a smarter way to negotiate, and there's a lot of value we can capture by changing our mindset of negotiation. So if I should summarize, changing the mindset of how we negotiate and explain to the world what negotiation is and what it isn't.